Alrighty, g'day everybody, it's the Doga! It's now time for the second installment of the AC/DC album review series. We move on to AC/DC's second album, released originally on the 1st of December 1975, that being, of course, T.N.T. This album here marked the transition into the sound of AC/DC that a lot of fans are familiar with today, and is often considered to be one of their best. The lineup for this particular period had now been solidified. We had the brothers Malcolm and Angus Young on guitars, of course, and Bon Scott on lead vocals, and the rhythm section was mostly finalised with Mark Evans on bass guitar and Phil Rudd on drums for the majority of the album, with one exception which we'll get to a bit later. This album was the first to go triple gold within weeks of its release, although High Voltage would take a much longer period to do so. So, starting off the album is, of course, perhaps one of their most infamous songs of all time, It's a Long Way to the Top If You Want to Rock and Roll, which, of course, starts out with that iconic guitar riff. As soon as you hear it, you know what the song is. And essentially, the song is about pretty much life and what the rock and roll world was, and or just the music industry in general. I don't like how today's artists are taking way too many shortcuts to fame, you know? It's just sticking a video up on YouTube and suddenly you're a megastar. That's not how it was back in 1975. And in my personal opinion, that's why a lot of artists today are virtually going to be nobodies in a few years from now, whereas AC/DC did it the right way. They would play so many gigs and pretty much paid their dues right from the beginning. Whereas today, shortcuts, that's all the bloody world is, and that's not fair. And of course, the song is also known for having bagpipes during the middle, a suggestion of George Young. According to Mark Evans' autobiography, the bagpipes were recorded by the various members of the band blowing into the drones of the bagpipes because they couldn't get them to work properly, despite three of them being Scotsmen. How do you work that one out? Next song is, of course, Rock and Roll Singer. This was another one that goes back to 1974, but was most likely rewritten, which is why it carries the Young Scott songwriting credit on the album. Rock and Roll Singer would, of course, make a couple of appearances in set lists over the years, but sort of disappeared at the end of 1976 and hasn't been played since, which is a shame. The next song is perhaps another one of their most well-known songs, The Jack, which was written about sexually transmitted diseases, and that's all I'll say about that. What you get on the album is a significantly censored and toned-down version of the song, as suggested by George Young, who thought that perhaps radio might give it a play, and there was no way that the original uncensored lyrics could ever make it onto radio. Either way, the Jack has pretty much remained in the band's set lists for the majority of their career, with the odd exception of the Rock or Bust tour. I don't think it's been played since that festival they did in mid-late 2015, before the tour officially began. Otherwise, it hasn't been played since. Otherwise, it almost always was. And side one closes out with Livewire, which is perhaps best known for its intro with the bass guitar, before Malcolm comes in with that great slow-burning riff, and then everything goes nuts at a 1 minute mark or so. Livewire would, of course, be the band's set opener from late 1975 up until January of 1980. I believe it was played just the once with Brian in 1982, and would also reappear in 2016, with a certain vocalist whose name shall not be mentioned. Thank you very much. Livewire is one of my favourites from the album, and it is a little overplayed during the late 70s. Some of the better performances of the song that I've heard come from the 76 to 77 period. Side 2, of course, opens with the title track, T.N.T, which is perhaps its best known for its Oi, Oi, Oi chant, which is, of course, heard during the intro and the choruses, of course. I believe the second the first line in the second verse was inspired by an advertisement for fly spray, specifically Mortein fly spray, although the original line was actually bad and mean and mighty unclean, which was perhaps slightly changed for copyright reasons. Either way, T.N.T. has always pretty much been a regular in the set lists since 1979. Don't think it was played at all in 1978 from all the recordings I've heard from that period. The next song, Rocker, is perhaps the fastest song in the band's catalogue, roughly running to just short of 3 minutes or so, depending on what version that you have. When released on cassette in 1975, as well as subsequent reissues of the album between 1977 and 1986 or so, the version that you hear cuts out roughly around 2 minutes and 54 seconds and gives us a few seconds of silence, whereas internationally, on the International Dirty Deeds, the song fades out before the cut. Personally, I prefer the cut version because that's the version I grew up hearing on my dad's copy of the album on cassette, and was still to this day I don't like how it fades. It just doesn't sound right to me. I like how it cuts instead of fades. It definitely works better. That's just my opinion, but of course in the comments you can tell me which version you prefer. Up next is a re-recording of the band's debut single from 1974, Can I Sit Next to You, Girl? This version definitely has a lot more of a muscular feel compared to the original recording. Also, the original features both the brothers playing lead, whereas on this version it's only Angus. Personal preferences, this version is a million times better. And this would come and go from the set list up until at least early 1977, sort of disappeared after that. But, can't always play the same songs, even though the fans do like the majority of the songs. Up next is, of course, officially the band's third single, and also the name of their first album, High Voltage. This, I believe, was recorded in the beginning of 1975, shortly before Phil Rudd joined the band, so I believe George Young plays bass, and Tony Carrenti, who had recorded the majority of the High Voltage album, plays the drums on this version, even though some have claimed that Phil does the drumming, but it definitely sounds like a very different drumming style on this compared to the rest of the album. Take a listen for yourself next time. You might see what I mean. Also, when released on the original version of the album, the song does run to about roughly 4 minutes and 19 seconds and segues into the next song pretty smoothly, whereas when originally released on single and on International High Voltage, the song would of course fade out, bringing the song down by about 17 seconds, which is rather annoying in my opinion. And the album closes out with another cover. This is the only other cover that the band have put on an album. School Days by Chuck Berry had been a regular in AC/DC's set list for some time, and their arrangement of the song would pretty much be what was recorded for the album, slightly readjusting the verses, and Angus pretty much going full throttle on the lead guitar breaks in the middle. No disrespect to the original Chuck Berry version, but personally I think AC/DC definitely gave it a much more of a updated feel towards it. And I think it would sort of stay in set list up until at least mid-1976, but either way, it was never played again afterwards. Which is a good thing, because, they really shouldn't be playing too many covers. Especially in the latter half of 76. But either way, that is the full album, roughly about 42 minutes in length, depending on whichever version you own. To this day, this is the only Australian album that remains in print for some strange reason. Ever since the 2003 remaster series, they pretty much wiped the rest of the Australian albums from history, which I think is a load of garbage. With the 50th anniversary of the band's formation coming up next year, hopefully, maybe one day we'll see a proper reissue of the Australian albums. Get rid of those stupid international back catalogue that shouldn't exist, but that's just my opinion. Either way, thank you very much for this review. I give this roughly an 8.5 to 9 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to leave a like and comment down below if you wish to do so. And of course, be sure if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. We're not too far away from 200 subscribers, but I don't know if we'll even get there by Christmas. So that's entirely up to you. But until next time, this is the Doga saying have a great week, everybody. And we shall see you again.